It's step one, right? It's probably the most critical piece to establishing that proactive life cycle so that you can keep up with the latest versions of software. You've got to have that foundational piece where you've discovered and all of your inventory of software and have attributes against those so that you can do prioritization around remediation of any issues. I think you guys have all mentioned some tools and things like that that help with that. Javier, you've written a blog recently that kind of talks a little bit about like Sift and Gripe and some other open source stuff that works in this space, but it goes out and helps you do some of that inventory. There's still going to be some manual effort. I think this is an early enough stage in the adoption of SBOMs that a lot of companies that haven't been doing this manually are really struggling to put some of this stuff together. And so even if you have some of the security scanners that are going out and discovering threats, knowing how that impacts your applications is really difficult to discern if you don't have that first piece, which is the bill of materials or the inventory of assets. Putting those two pieces together really gets you to that next level of maturity where you can prioritize whether or not you're going to patch certain systems on immediately, or if you have time to wait and see whether those patches have other side effects, or be able to test them more thoroughly with your application. So having that inventory of your assets, being able to categorize them as, hey, we've got this in development, we've got this in test, we've got this in production. This is actually deployed to externally facing customers versus internally facing customers, things like that become more and more critical as you mature your CI/CD process and try to stay ahead of all these different versions and the softwares that are rapidly changing and completely integrated all the time.
You said something really interesting there too, is understanding how you're actually consuming the given software, because in some cases those CVEs that come out, you might not be utilizing any of the functionality that the CVE is addressing. And so a really good example, PHP 7, well, actually PHP 8, but had a issue with its SOAP extension recently, and it's specifically around the HTTP digest authentication with the SOAP extension. If you're not using SOAP, it doesn't apply to you. If you're not using the HTTP digest with SOAP, it doesn't apply to you. So it's understanding all those different levels, but having that list first is obviously, that is the biggest priority you can have. And from there, then understanding how you're consuming the software.
Yeah, because there
Absolutely.
are going to be situations where perhaps it's in an isolated environment where the software is actually vulnerable to that, but perhaps it's a remotely exploitable defect. But you have the entire system behind a firewall that buys you time. You don't want to not patch it, but you can weigh the risk of whether or not you want to do that immediately or not.